Senator Upke moves Senate File 4352 be recommended to pass and placed on general orders. Senator Johnson, if you and Robin Roan would like to present the bill, please go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I appreciate the opportunity to bring this forward today. Senate File 4352 is an opportunity to really work on what the federal government started back in 1993 with the Federal Family Medical Leave Act. Now, this created a right for employees in companies greater than 50 individuals, 50 employees, 12 weeks of unpaid leave. Now, there's nuances and whatnot to that. But as you can see, there's a big downside to that. You can take your 12 weeks, but it's pretty difficult for most families to do that, foregoing a paycheck. So different states have taken different approaches. We've got a California, a New York approach, and there are a number of other states. Even the state of Minnesota, with House File 5, thought of an approach to mandate paid family leave. And there's some benefits to that. You know, the idea of paid family leave is to give families that with a newborn or adopted time to bond, time to get to know the family, time to do that. It also allows reduced stress for if you have a sick family member. You can take some time to really nurse them back to health. The other thing that I think is pretty pertinent right now is it also reduces the community spread of disease. So you've got that aspect to it as well. But you know, the Minnesota model that we had in HF 5 had some real downsides to it. There's the technical hurdles. You know, Minnesota would be responsible for creating an insurance product then. If you think of MinLars or MinSure, you know that's probably not our strong suit. We went to the private market with the VTRS system for our MinLars, which seems to be working good. You know, relying on the private market to provide something that has already been established in the private market, now bringing that to the statewide to make it a cost-effective and very effective program. You know, there's also the cost, the startup cost for the program in HF5. So you've got a large startup cost for that. You've also have the tax on both the employer and the employee, which disproportionately affects the lower income employee. And then this also intrudes on the private law contracts. So now you're starting to put a mandate on what you know is typically a negotiation between an employer and employee. So you got that issue. What Senate File 4352 does, it allows a market for a private market for companies that already do disability income insurance to provide the paid family leave. So a company could buy a policy or be part of that market to offer that to individuals that they're hoping to employ. So this is more of a market-based approach to that, which really fits the needs of companies and individuals. Now, if you think about it, the Senator Jensen just had a great analogy to what's going on right now with the COVID issue, where he says we're not all in the same boat, but we're all part of the same storm. The same could be said for companies and employees. We're not all in the same situation. We don't all have the same margins. We're not all in the same situation. What this one does is allows customized insurance products for different companies to offer to their employees, which I think is very sensitive to the situations that each individual in each company faces. So with that, I'll just get to the outline of the bill and quickly go through it. So what Senate File 4352 is, an insurance company licensed to issue disability insurance policies in Minnesota may also offer paid family leave insurance benefits. The benefits may be offered either through a rider on a disability insurance policy or something separate completely. So that's section 1. Section 2 is simply the definitions. Section 3 is the permissive language of what the benefits may be. Now, the commissioner and the insurance company we'll have to craft what that insurance product will actually look like, what the benefits are going to be. But here are some of the things that may be included in that. And that's going to be a policy that will be crafted again by what the state will want to see through the commissioner, the commission of or the Commerce Commission, I should say, and what the insurance companies will be willing to offer. Also talks about the benefit period. Just like in HF5, this has the ability to allow a time period without any benefits, whether a week or not, but that can also be negotiated with the insurance companies. And then there are some in Section 7, some permissible limitations, exclusions, such as if you take this benefit and then you go and you work at another job during that time to essentially increase your income, you can do some exclusions there, just like you could in any of the other proposals. So with that, that's the bill. Unless Ms. Rowland would want to add anything, I think we can go straight to questions. Senator Dames, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Johnson. Ms. Rowan, would you like to make any further comments?
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'll be brief. Good morning, everyone. It is truly lovely to see all of you. My name is Robin Rowan. I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Insurance and Financial Service Council, known as MIFSI. Our members promote the financial security of Minnesotans by providing life, disability, and long-term care insurance, as well as annuities and other retirement plans. We support over 50,000 jobs in the state, and our agents and financial advisors are located in every corner of the state. We view paid family leave benefits as a natural extension of what we're already doing in the disability space. And while we've all heard about the importance of family leave in protecting the financial well-being and health of our employees and their families, the only way right now that employers in Minnesota can offer that is to self-insure. And that puts it out of reach for many employers. Authorizing a private market insurance solution will make it more affordable and accessible for employers to offer in the state. Plus, it has the added benefit, as Senator Johnson explained so clearly, of allowing employers to craft a policy that fits his or her business and workforce. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. We would view this as a partnership with the Department of Commerce, who would approve both the policies and the rates, but we think this is an important benefit to be able to provide in Minnesota. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, Robin. And I think before we go to questions, we do have a testifier. Ms. Quaid would like to testify. So, Ms. Quaid, if you could please state your name and who you represent and go ahead with your testimony. And if you could keep it around 3 minutes or so, we'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Erin May Quaid. I am the Advocacy Director at Gender Justice, a legal and advocacy policy nonprofit advancing gender equity through the law. I'm here today to ask you to not support Senate File 4352. We're appearing remotely today because of COVID-19. And if there's one thing that this pandemic has made clear, is that every Minnesotan, regardless of income or industry, needs an equitable system that allows them to care for themselves and their loved ones when they're sick without sacrificing their income. Unfortunately, Senate File 4352 does nothing to create this system. Instead, this bill creates a profit stream for insurance companies and an inequitable, inaccessible system for too many Minnesotans. Here's how. Unlike a statewide plan that would provide every Minnesotan with the same length of leave, standardized income replacement levels, and the same job protections, Senate File 4352 grants incredibly broad discretion to insurance companies to figure out what paid family leave would look like to Minnesotans. Under this bill, private insurance companies could determine who can take leave, when they can take it, how long they can take it for, what they can take it for, the cost to each person, and the amount of income they'll replace. There's no need for this bill to even leave open to insurance companies to figure out what paid family leave could look like, because we actually have a lot of evidence-based practices and examples from other states and countries about what families actually need, and this bill does not take any of those evidence-based approaches into account. talking a little bit about insurance companies, private disability insurance has been available on the market for years, and they remain inaccessible to a majority of workers, especially employees in low-wage industries who already lack access to paid leave. And worse, insurance companies are notorious for discrimination, charging women, people with disabilities, people of color, senior citizens, and people with chronic illness higher rates for less coverage. And with absolutely zero protections written into this bill, insurance companies would be free to exclude paid leave coverage for Minnesotans who are women, who are pregnant, who are married or divorced or single or have a dog or live in a blue house or are tall. There's literally not one stipulation in this bill that says insurance companies are not allowed to limit, reduce, or exclude coverage for based on anything. And last, I want to talk about what this bill expressly does not provide or allow for, unlike other bills that have been introduced in this body, including House File 5. Line 4.24 would not allow two parents to take leave at the same time to bond with their new baby. Lines 2.3 and 2.7 prevent Minnesotans from taking paid family leave to care for an aunt, an uncle, a sibling, a grandparent, a grandchild, mother, or father-in-law. This bill provides no safety leave, leaving survivors of domestic abuse, sexual assault, or stalking without access to paid leave. This bill does not provide employment protections or protect Minnesotans from employer retaliation for using paid family leave benefits. And perhaps worst of all, this bill provides no medical leave, which means the person taking paid family leave would be caring for a sick family member who doesn't have access to paid medical leave. In the midst of a global pandemic, a for-profit insurance industry I don't think is going to solve the crisis of caregiving going on in our state. This bill only opens up another avenue of business for insurance companies while providing exactly zero more Minnesotans with paid family leave. At best, Senate File 4352 creates an expensive, unreliable patchwork system that would exacerbate already existing inequalities and provide few Minnesotans with limited benefits for more of their money. Any bill that fails to provide paid family and medical leave to all Minnesotans fails Minnesota. I hope you vote no on Senate File 4352. And I'll stay for questions.
Senator Dames, I think you're on mute again.
Members, are there any questions for the presenters, Senator Johnson and Senator and Ms. Rowan, and or the testifier, Ms. Quaid? Are there any questions from the members? Senator Pratt.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to thank Senator Johnson for bringing this bill forward. I think this is having gone through House File 5 in the Commerce, Jobs, and Energy Conference Committee last year. I think it became clear just through some early questioning that there were a lot of flaws in that as an insurance bill. And I think Senator Johnson's done a nice job of working with Ms. Rowan to find a private sector solution to this problem that will make sure that the state doesn't have a large, well, first of all, the state isn't getting into the insurance business. Senator Johnson said some of our attempts to even support the industry have been difficult, but also to make sure that we're not on the hook backing this up, and especially coming, being in a severe recession with statistics that rival or surpass that of the Great Depression, making sure we're not putting new mandates on our micro businesses that need to be opening back up. I guess my question is for Ms. Rowan. When we talk about that any employer can take this on versus self-insuring, is there a minimum size that would be needed in order to provide this coverage? Second, I believe some of these policies already exist, or similar policies already exist. Do we see the types of discrimination that Ms. May Quaid talked about?
Ms. Rowan?
Mr. Chair, Senator Pratt, I'll take your last question first. The kinds of discrimination that were mentioned by the other testifier are prohibited under Minnesota law. We're not able to charge rates or to underwrite in a manner that is arbitrary, capricious, or unfairly discriminatory. And all of our rates and underwriting criteria have to be actuarially justified. These policies do exist in other states, states that have a larger program. And my understanding is that policies could be offered to groups as small as 2, but it would not be sold on an individual basis outside of the employer.
Senator Pratt, follow up?
Yeah, it's for Ms. May Quaid. You talked about lack of protections for against retaliation. Why would I need additional protections against retaliation for using such a benefit when Minnesota Statute 181.964 already asserts an employer may not retaliate against an employee for asserting rights or remedies provided?
Ms. Quaid?
Correct. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Senator Pratt, can you repeat that? There was an echo going on while you were asking that question.
Yeah, statute 181.964 already prohibits retaliation. Why would I need to provide additional protections against retaliation that's already covered in state statute?
Ms. Quaid?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Pratt. So referring to House File 5, there are explicit job protections, not just for retaliation, but also that protect you from losing your job or from, not having your position, your pay, the same benefits when you return from paid family leave. And none of those protections exist here in Senate File 4352. So in addition to retaliation, it's also about protecting the job that you have when you take leave to care for a family member, and that does not exist in Senate File 4352.
Okay, because you
Senator Pratt?
mentioned retaliation, and as jobs chair, I know that's already covered.
Senator Chamberlain?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Johnson, Mr. Owen, and Ms. Quaid. Just a comment, right? I mean, nothing's going to be perfect in this world. Very few things are, but I would imagine this is a great first step to allowing coverage, affordable coverage for employees by employers. Employers will be paying the premiums, a group policy, and then some transferability here. You can't imagine that this would be a bad step. It's a step in the right direction, a good step to start addressing it. I can't imagine why this would be a bad way to go. If we're looking for perfection, that's going to be a long wait, but this is a great start to
Johnny, you've got to be
smartly addressing this issue. So thank you, Senator Johnson and testifiers for the comments, but I think it's a great step forward, and I think we should be positive and optimistic about this. And going forward, there's not going to be much money for the state for a while coming. So I think this is probably the best approach. We're just not going to have those assets here available for quite some time now. Thank you.
Senator Hayden?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and to our testifiers. I have a couple of questions, but I'll just start with some of the underwriting criteria. Maybe either Senator Johnson or Ms. Rowan can answer that. As you know, the work that we've done hard in the ACA is to prevent people with pre-existing conditions and other things to not be able to get health care benefits. So I guess my question is, as part of the underwriting criteria in this bill, could somebody be denied, or even if they weren't denied initially, could they lose this coverage if they or someone in their family developed a pre-existing condition?
Ms. Rowan?
Mr. Chair, Senator Hayden, this isn't, income replacement isn't considered traditional health insurance. So I don't believe that pre-existing conditions would be a part of the underwriting process. Having said that, as a trade association executive by any trust laws, I am unable to dig into what my company's underwriting criteria would be. But again, I would say I would offer that the Department of Commerce needs to approve these policies and these rates, and we're prohibited by law from having unfair, arbitrary, or discriminatory criteria.
Senator Hayden.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. So Ms. Rowan, thank you for that answer. So it doesn't look like in the bill it expressly says that they can. And the reason, obviously, that I have the concern, and even Senator Johnson talked about the situation in the current pandemic that we're in, and people are getting sick, and it's going to have lingering effects to their health care. And so I'm concerned that, amongst other things about this bill, that there'll be people who won't be able to access the bill, or even if they get it and they develop a pre-existing condition which make them use this insurance product more than what the insurers would like to pay for, that we would have a problem. So I know some of my other colleagues have other questions, so I'll just maybe start there and then monitor the discussion. I may have some other questions, Mr. Chair.
Senator Latz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. First of all, just to clarify something that Senator Pratt brought up, I looked up the statutory section he referred to, section 181.964, and that applies only to personnel records. So it would not have any impact whatsoever in terms of prohibiting retaliation in a context like this. It's just not applicable. I want to thank Ms. Quaid for her testimony. Frankly, I think it was a scathing indictment of the failures of this bill, the patchwork that would result even within employers as well as between employers in terms of what paid leave opportunities may be available to employees, full or part-time. But I'd like to ask just maybe a couple of questions to try to clarify some of this, if I may. First of all, Mr. Chairman, I know that there are other people who sought to be public testifiers in this committee hearing. Can you tell me if we're going to be hearing public testimony from anyone other or in addition to Ms. Quaid?
Senator Latz, the people who wanted to testify had the opportunity to, and that these are the people. Ms. Quaid is the one that signed up. However, there are several letters in your packet for and against, so we will have no other public testimony because nobody else signed up.
All right, thank you. I was informed that someone else specifically was going to try to sign up, but maybe that person did not follow through. Can we get some idea either from Ms. Rowan or from Senator Johnson? Where did this bill come from? Who brought the bill to the legislature?
Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Latz. This was a bill that Ms. Rowan and others, along with our Senate council, partisan council, worked together to put together. So that's where I got the language, and we spent some time putting the nuts and bolts together.
Senator Latz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do we know whose idea it was?
Senator Johnson.
Mr. Chair, Senator Latz, good ideas come from all over the place. This one was brought from the industry itself, finding a solution for this problem. So yeah.
Senator Latz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I have a great deal of respect for the insurance industry, but also a healthy skepticism about whether or not their proposals are necessarily in the best interests of the consumers here, or the working people, the employees, as opposed, or even employers necessarily, as opposed to being motivated by another profit center for the insurance industry. So I'm a bit concerned, and one reason I scrutinize these kind of proposals real carefully is because of that. So I guess the one question I did have that Senator Hayden already covered was the impact on pre-existing conditions, if any, and it sounds like there's nothing in the bill that would prohibit these policies from excluding or allowing the exclusion of potential people being covered because there are pre-existing conditions within their, either themselves or in their families. If they are being asked at the time of underwriting or application, if they have family members that have heart conditions, have chronic health conditions, have had a history of certain kinds of problems, if they're diabetics that may occasionally require or have some additional problems, if they're epileptics and sometimes need leave to take care of family members like that, or history of absenteeism from the workplace due to family related medical concerns. Maybe an employee took time out of paid PTO, paid time off, because this kind of paid family leave was not available. Whether any of that can be used to refuse to provide coverage or to substantially increase a premium based on that kind of a history. So I'm concerned about that.
Do you have a question, Senator Latz? Do you have a question?
Well, I guess maybe I should ask if Ms. Rowan could amplify on my comments and maybe amplify on her response to Senator Hayden's questions, whether I'm misunderstanding what's in the bill in that regard.
Ms. Rowan.
Mr. Chair, Senator Latz, my apologies. I'm not as quick on the draw with the muting and the unmuting yet. Mr. Chair and Senator Latz, again, we felt this bill provides a good first step to allowing employers who are unable to afford it to be able to offer family leave benefits to their employees, something you can't do now unless you can afford to self-insure. The point is to provide coverage. It's a voluntary product. So if it's not providing worthwhile coverage or is priced to be unaffordable, there simply will be no market for it. And that is absolutely not the goal here.
Thank you, Ms. Rowan. Senator Latz, anything further? We do need to move on. We've got other people that have questions and we're going to be running out of time. So, well, Senator Latz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe I should ask, this meeting is scheduled to go until noon, isn't that correct?
It is not. It's scheduled to go till, yes, it is scheduled to go till noon. I apologize. Yeah, I was thinking it was 11:30. You're right. It is noon. So go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there any projection or analysis that's been done as to how many Minnesota employees or what proportion of the workforce is likely to be covered by this proposal were it to become law? What's the expected uptake by employers? How many of their employees will be covered, that kind of a thing?
Ms. Rowan?
Mr. Chair, Senator Latz, I don't have any information to respond to that question other than we know there's a lot of demand out there. Employers do want to provide this benefit to take care of their employees and their families, and they view it as an important tool in recruiting and retention of employees.
Senator Latz.
Mr. Chairman, so it sounds anecdotal, but without any kind of reliable numbers that we could say if it's 10% or 80% of employers would want to purchase this product or might be interested in purchasing this product. My other question, Mr. Chairman, is whether or not there's been an analysis done of what the costs to an employer of this program might be in comparison to House File 5 that had a 0.6, I think it was a 0.6% surcharge for each employee matched by an employee contribution. funding similar to the system that is set up for workers' compensation, which we know is very, very good at providing coverage for injured workers. Any cost comparisons been done, how this program would compare?
Mr. Owen?
Mr. Chair, Senator Latz, I mean, this program does not impose a payroll tax increase. So it's not not an apples to apples comparison.
Senator Latz?
So, Mr. Chairman, I guess the answer is no, we don't have any numbers that we can say this would be a more efficient or less expensive way to do it than a payroll tax, a component like in House File 5. But we do know that necessarily, because this is not mandatory to cover all employees, that there will be gaps all over the state, even between employees, perhaps. If it's not, if it ends up being an employee purchase program, the employer may simply say, if you are an employee here, you have the option of buying this coverage for yourself. That's not much of an option. If an employer is offering it, we don't know what requirements there are for offering it to different employees. And certainly employer to employer, they make their own decisions. So you could have similar employers in similar industries and similar geographic regions offering entirely different packages or opportunities for their employees, when the studies indicate how important paid family leave is to employee health and, frankly, to employer sustainability for their workforce as well. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm very concerned. I'm very happy that now all groups in the Senate are engaging in a discussion about how to meet this important need, and a recognition that this is a very important need to make available for our workforce in Minnesota. But I think this proposal would be not only insufficient, but counterproductive, and create a lot more problems than it would solve. So respectfully, Mr. Chairman and Senator Johnson, I'm going to have to oppose this bill.
Senator Champion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to ask a couple questions. And I want to thank Senator Latz and Senator Hayden for highlighting some of the challenges that I have with the bill. And I also want to thank Erin May Quaid for her articulation of what are some of the challenges also in the bill. One of the things that Senator Johnson stated, and I would like for him to answer this question, he mentioned in his opening comments the importance of this product being available for others so that people are not left behind. Senator Johnson, can you tell me who would potentially be left behind in a situation as to if this bill was passed, right? Like, for an example, if an employer has the option, who usually will take advantage of the option? And number two, embellish upon what Senator Latz indicated, that the cost could be just carried on to the employee and the employer not having any responsibility for any premium costs. Can you talk a little about that so we can see who would or would not benefit from this bill? And then I have a follow-up.
Senator Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Champion, for that question. There's a good article from last year in the Chicago Tribune that talks a little bit about who benefits and who doesn't in the mandatory systems that you're seeing. And this one is particularly looking at the California system, where, you know, the headline, it actually says this thrust to give the mandated care, ironically, could worsen the inequality. And what they're seeing is that those on the lower end of the SES spectrum end up taking this option much less, even though it's a mandate and they have access to it. Because it only gives them a percentage of their income, they typically cannot afford. If you're at the lower end, you can't afford to take that pay cut. So you end up taking this option less. So who does it end up benefiting? Those at the higher end of the SES. So it's interesting how this program works. So if you make it a mandate, you have those at the lower end of the spectrum who are paying for the program, but don't have the option of opting into it, or don't feel like they have the ability to opt into it because of the pay cut that they'll end up taking. So to me, if you put the burden on the lower end, and yet those who are taking it are above, 300% of the poverty line and up, for the majority of them, really, if we do a mandate, we're really doing the exact opposite of what we're trying to do. What this does, this private market approach to it, is it allows those companies and those individuals who can really negotiate this benefit to have that, and yet it doesn't put it on the back of those who can't afford it. So to me, this is the way that we want to be looking at it.
So Senator Johnson, Mr. Chair.
Senator Champion.
Senator Johnson, you really didn't answer my question as it pertains to this particular bill, because what you're trying to say and to suggest is that this particular bill allows someone to have the choice at a higher cost to get the same benefit that they would get from a House File 5, where the cost was shared and the cost would be much lower. Because in this particular proposal, even if you have an employer who takes this benefit and passes 100% of the cost to an employee, the one who benefits is the one who can afford it. And if you've already articulated that they could not afford to take any money out of their paycheck under House File 5, that's what you say. I don't necessarily agree with that. But that House File 5, I want to make sure I'm not getting my words mixed up here, would make it available, this benefit available for everyone, and especially those who are on the lower side of the financial equation. So, Senator Johnson, I don't quite see it that way. I see that you want to privatize this and not share the cost, because there's nothing in your bill that would prohibit an employer from passing 100% of the premium cost onto the employee. So to the testifier, Ms. Rowan, am I correct that that under this bill, if it was to pass, that an employer could pass 100% of the cost onto the employee? Is that right? Or can you talk to me about that?
Ms. Rowan?
Mr. Chair, Senator Champion, that is one option under the bill, is that the employer could have the employees pay for the benefit. The employer could also, under this bill, take on the entire cost himself, or they could, his or herself, or they could cost share. And that's one way that flexibility allows this policy to be more affordable to more employers.
Senator
And Ms. Rowan, would you agree with me that if an employer took the option of 100% of the premium being paid by an employee, would then create a disparity between those who can afford it and those who cannot?
Ms. Rowan?
Mr. Chair, Senator Champion, I would, yes, there will be some employers that will be able to afford this and some employers that may not be able to afford it. But right now, far fewer employers can afford it, because the only way to offer the benefit is to self-insure it. This makes it available to more employers. Is it a panacea for the entire family leave issue? No, probably not. And this bill isn't necessarily inconsistent with moving to a larger system further down the road. In fact, House File 5 contemplates employers exercising a private option. So while this will not make it available to everyone in the state, it will make it more available than it is now. And considering the importance of these benefits, we think that's a step forward.
And Mr. Chair, and I'm going to say this last question, and then I'll be done. One of the challenges, and I think Aaron McQuay highlighted it, is that when you create this sort of privatization without this public option, as we see under House File 5, you remove the opportunity for those who really need it as well to not have access to it because they can't afford it. at least under House File 5, there was a sharing so that you have a wide range of individuals who ordinarily would be unable to afford it as an employer would now be able to make it an option or something that their employees could take advantage of. Last but certainly not least, I know that we've been talking a little bit about the risk factors and the risk management. I think that's the word that you all like to use in the insurance business. So it appears to me that the risk management could be written in such a way that would make it inherently impossible for certain people from certain zip codes in certain areas to even take advantage of this benefit, because the whole idea sometimes is insurance companies, and we love them and or respect them, that I'll say that there's no malice towards insurance companies, but it appears that insurance companies want to look at their bottom line too. They want to look at the opportunity to provide the tool, but also make sure that they are making some money at the same time. So isn't it really conceivable that the risk management factors will be written in such a way that it would be harder for people who may have families, maybe even not themselves, but their families may disproportionately have healthcare challenges, and therefore make it much more difficult, even if they were able to pay, to be able to take advantage of this opportunity. Ms. Rowan, and then Senator Johnson. Thanks.
Mr. Owen?
Mr. Chair, Senator Champion, this is an income replacement product, not a health insurance product. And our underwriting criteria would need to be approved by the Department of Commerce. And the idea would be certainly to cover more people, not cover less.
Senator Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Champion. Right now, we don't have one policy that's available for those smaller companies that may be able to or may not be able to afford it. If you're self-insured, if you're greater than 500, PricewaterhouseCoopers, they can afford it. Deloitte, they can afford it. But what about our smaller employers around the state that would like to offer this option? It's not even an option right now. And what this would do is give the opportunity for those companies to offer this benefit to their employees. So for me, I don't understand why something like this wouldn't have a more positive, you wouldn't look at this more positively, as this starting to open up the door to get more Minnesotans that benefit to spend time at home with their loved ones.
Senator Chamberlain?
Mr. Chair, can I just comment to that, and then I'll be quiet?
That'll be fine.
Senator Johnson, the question is, why do we have to start with with privatization? Why is it that we couldn't start with a public option? So if you really wanted to make sure that smaller employers were able to take advantage of such an opportunity, why start here? Why not start with allowing smaller employers to do House File 5? And then
Senator Johnson.
as Ms. Rowan said, that even under House File 5, there is a private option that should be looked at after the public option is in effect.
Mr. Chair and Senator Champion, I think in this federalist system, we are trying different things, trying to figure out how to make the system work in the most cost-effective way that really gets benefits out to individuals. In the state of Minnesota, we're not going to be following what's going on in California or what's going on in New York. We want to try a system that maximizes those benefits. And what we see from the initial outline here is that this is something that will be able to fit businesses and individuals at whatever level they're at. If a business can afford it, great, they can offer this. But we don't want to put that on the backs of those who can't afford it. So this is really a customized approach to Minnesota, to the industries, in a way that we can see if it works, great, let's continue it. But if we go straight to the public option, boy, we'll never be able to change it. I mean, that's something that's going to continue on and on. So I think this is a great place to start.
Senator Chamberlain.
Thank you. Several quick points. One is members have been bringing up some higher philosophical positions and points here. So then I shall jump in and challenge and throw some other things in for consideration. Motive, profit motive. Do any of you members work for free? Or do you contribute all of your money to a neighborhood pool? So if any of you work for free or wish to work for free or contribute all your money to charity or neighborhood pool or to the government, please let me know after this committee. Or feel free to write an op-ed suggesting as much that you do. So the motive, we're all motivated to make a living and work and feed our families. Secondly, competition. We're all in competition here. All of us are competing for position, even in this committee and these political bodies. Competition makes things a lot better. That's why you have good cars and great homes and great shovels and great tools to use, because you get them at the best price and the best quality for what you want. And you have options. You can buy the plastic piece, or you can buy the good piece. Competition is not bad. It sharpens you. It makes us better. But more importantly, the competition for jobs is intense in this state, as it is across the country. Employers want good employees. They want to keep them. It costs too much to keep cycling through that. That will be a motive for them. Third, this is really good, passing on the cost to the employees. So if the state pays for this, members, if the state pays for this, 100% of the cost is passed on to the employees. Because where do you think that comes from? It comes from all of you sitting on this panel and in the audience, everybody at home. The 100% of the cost, if the state pays for this, comes back to the employer and the employee. It also comes back in the form of higher cost in products. So the 100% of the cost will be passed on if the public option is taken. There can be no mistake about that. Next, why is it assumed that the public option is the best option? Why is it assumed that all of us here in this committee and in this august body and 201 legislators and a governor and all the bureaucracy, that option will be the best for the citizens? That is one option. It is not multiple options. It is not competition. It doesn't make things better. It is one option controlled by a bunch of politicians and a bureaucracy. Why is it assumed that the public option must be first and is the best? That's a faulty assumption. And next, for years, now you could argue this, and certainly it is true that in cases that employers over the years have not offered great insurance or benefits, but many employers have offered great insurance and benefits to their employees. Many of them have. And finally, I go back to my optimism piece. This is a beginning of something that is needed for all the reasons I've just mentioned. Arguably, most of you have already made the case for. Optimism here. You keep trying to punch holes in something that is trying to solve a problem for a large number of people out there in the public. Now, there are different ways to get at that, but I think some of the assumptions we're making, public option is the best, that profit and making money is the wrong motive when we're all motivated by the same thing. None of us here are perfect. There are going to be problems, but I think I choose the optimistic approach, get this thing afloat and improve it as it goes and get people access to paid family leave through a legitimate, good process. Now you can all go ahead and just try to shoot holes in it, but your arguments, those are tough arguments for you to refute, because your assumptions, I believe, are just misplaced. Thank you.
Senator Hayden.
Well, Mr. Chair, thank you. And Thank you for that eloquent soliloquy, Senator Chamberlain. And I really am happy today that you're optimistic. I think that that really warms my heart on a rainy day that you're so optimistic. And I think that we're on the right path. However, I just wanted to just challenge a couple of things that you said. I wanted to make sure and counsel or others or that know House File 5 a little better than me would know that you said that it was 100% the public option on the taxpayers, and the way that I read it, and I certainly could be wrong because I haven't went through that bill with a fine-tooth comb, but it was the employer, the employee, and the state would participate in that process, and so there was percentages of each of them, kind of like unemployment insurance, if you will, that would participate and create this pool for people. So I just want to make sure, and if I'm wrong, I'm more than willing to say that I am. I just don't think it's that. I also want to just highlight a little bit of what Senator Champion said, is that often we talk about these things in a way that everything is equal, and that insurance, regardless if it's health insurance or life insurance or auto insurance, it gets applied equally. We know that based on underwriting criteria, often what zip code you live in, where you live, maybe even your ethnicity, creates an imbalance in terms of who pays what and where. And I would, and I know others would refute that, and I think others would suggest that somehow everything is equal. Well, I can tell you that it's not. That we live in a society that has bias in it, inherently implicit. It's there, and so I think that one of the things that a public option we would hope to do, and what we continue to do in the work that we've done, is to try to eliminate that as much as possible and to make sure it's there. I want to be clear, I am not indicting any one of you or the insurance companies, Ms. Rowan, the folks she represents, to say that would be its intention. But often that is the way that it plays out through these complex series of underwriting, actuarial, analytics, et cetera. There's been plenty of evidence to say that has happened. And so I just think that, Senator Johnson, I don't begrudge you from bringing it and trying to, bring something to the marketplace. I just don't know if your customized version of this actually gets at the people in which most need it. You talked about it on the public side, that it's not needed as it relates to employers, employees on the lower end of the spectrum. I might refute that. I was doing some quick Google searches on that, but I don't think that's the time for us. We should do that offline at some point. But what I would say is that it's almost ensured that these low-income folks under this plan wouldn't be able, or those small companies wouldn't be able to offer this to them, especially in lieu of the option of passing 100% of the benefit to them, and if they're already at minimum wage or a low-end worker. So, I appreciate, like Senator Ladd said, that we now are looking at this all over the country. I appreciate that COVID-19, I think, has finally got us all together to try to say that there are some inequities in the system, that there's some rights and basic rights that people need, if nothing else, not only to do things like spend time with their children or their babies, but also not go to work if you're suspected to be a carrier of this virus, to flatten the curve. I think it has really illuminated that, and I'm glad that we're all finally looking at it. However, I would assert that this option off the top, maybe as an option to a broader scheme, might work, but this in of itself is probably not the way that we want to go due to all of the things that we have articulated. But I will say this, Mr. Chair, leaving, once again, I am really, really excited that Senator Chamberlain is optimistic.
Senator Wickland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I don't have any questions, but I wanted to provide some comments about the bill. Because I'm glad that we're having this conversation. I think paid family leave and paid medical leave and paid safety leave are things that we absolutely should be having a lot of conversations about and finding ways to implement them. It's critical. The gaps that we're seeing right now that people have in being able to take leave when they need to it's just something that we absolutely need to address. But I do think that this bill, to me, doesn't really drive us forward to a solution that truly helps employees or employers, maybe even. And it just leaves so many gaps in terms of what's defined and what's left to the insurance companies. To me, it seems like it leaves so much open to the insurance companies to define and really not much protection for the people who would be paying for or purchasing the policies. And I guess the key issues for me are around this lack of definition of, significant parts of the policy. There's this unpaid waiting period definition that is very open. The amount of benefits paid is left open to definition. And Section 7, the limitations, exclusions, and reduction, those are really unlimited. I mean, it really doesn't exclude any sort of limitation or exclusion that the insurance company wants to write into it. And obviously, yeah, people won't necessarily buy something if it has absolutely no value, but I think the employee is really not in a good position because the employer may negotiate what they think they can afford or offer, and it might not have much value at all to the employee. So I really think that this isn't a good place to start. It's a step, but I don't think it's a positive one for employees. And I think the unknowns really about what it would cost really bring into question as to whether it will be affordable. I haven't heard anything today that tells me that what's going to be offered as a plan is actually affordable, because nobody's defined what affordable means to an employer or an employee. Just that saying that House Bill 5 is too much, and that to me isn't enough information to say that this is a good step forward. So I'll be opposing the bill, and I hope that we can continue to have more conversations, but I hope they'll have more substance and more focus on employees and what they need, because we do know what employees need in terms of their leave definitions. So thank you.
Members, any other questions? Seeing none, Senator Utke renews his motion that Senate File 4352 be passed and placed on general orders. Senator Johnson, any final comments?
Mr. Chair and members, thank you so much for your time today. I think this is an important conversation. I'm glad that we were able to get a different perspective on ways to help Minnesotans across the state get these sorts of benefits in their company and in their life. So I know that many of you are disappointed that this isn't an all approach, that we can't do everybody on this, but this is an effective approach that we can start covering people across Minnesota. And I think we need to start somewhere. And this is a great way to begin that process. So I appreciate your consideration. I appreciate your questions, and we'll continue the discussion, but I'd also appreciate your yes vote today. So with that, Mr. Chair, I yield the floor.
Thank you. Members, we will go ahead and vote on Senate File 4352. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay.
No.
Carries. Motion carries. Members, this concludes the business in front of the Senate Commerce and Consumer Protection Committee. There being no further business, we are adjourned.